Hey everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Speak Plainly podcast, where we speak plainly about things that matter. I am your host, Owl Medicine, and today I want to apologize for being gone for so long. I know it's been a while since my last podcast, and I do apologize. This is the longest I believe I've been gone since Key got sick, and that is kind of parallel to what's been going on most recently. Just to tell you what's been happening in my life, I have been launching my book. I was supposed to be right now in Greece and then to India and to Kathmandu, and before that I was supposed to be in the UK, and before that New York. Well, I did make it to New York, and I got there, and one of my closest friends of 15 years had a full episode where oh my goodness, it was exhausting. All of it was pointed at me, and I'm really worried about them. But anyway, I got to New York, and I had to turn around for my own health and safety, my own mental and physical health. I had been in a bad way for a while, and I didn't quite realize it because I operate really well under a lot of stress, and I enjoy that about me, to the point where I didn't actually realize how stressed I was. I didn't realize how far above baseline I was. Luckily, I was able to turn around and come back. Unfortunately, I missed all of my UK friends, and I didn't get to go hang out with Arnie on the circus boat. I'm not going to get to go to Kathmandu this fall or India, but that's okay, because it turns out I had a lot more work than I thought waiting for me with this book. Which brings me to the other bit of why I've been gone so long. It's been crazy. Not only was I planning for a 4-month vacation trip, work trip thing where I was going to be doing the book stuff on the back burner over the course of the next 4 months. Well, that was very silly of me because I had way more work to do than I thought. I wound up paying a bunch of money to people to put on covers, to design covers for me. I've spent $1,000 actually so far on cover designs, and they were all terrible outside of the one that I made. And here's the super exciting part. I just received in my very first printed paperback copy of Rethinking Broken. Yeah! Woohoo! Go me! Yay! I am so excited. It came in on Friday, and I spent all week working on my van because that's van life and my life. I was supposed to be taking this week as a bit of a down week, so I could really come back at the book hard next week with a totally fresh perspective, do one last listen through, really, and do the indexing and really make sure I'm dead on everything in my works cited. And I didn't get to have that down week, thanks to van problems, but I did get my book in, and I'm so happy. I'm so happy, and I'm so excited, and I wanted to share that with you guys real quickly. So, back to the podcast. A few things for the future to keep in mind. When I first started this podcast, I didn't really know what was going on or what I was going to be doing, what I was going to be talking about. I mean, I could guess. Anybody who knows me could guess, because everything tends to wander toward this fundamental, what I consider a fundamental level of biology and physics, and you throw in some psychology in there. But I had these ideas and concepts that I'd been working on for years and years, and I've kind of gone through a lot of those. I've talked about a lot of them. A lot of them wound up in my book, not all of them, and the ones that aren't in my book, for the most part, outside of a few I still have on my list, I've covered most of the big important things that I was like, everyone in the world needs to know this. So now I have a new opportunity presenting itself to me of what is the podcast going to look like next year? Next year will be year number 3. The book will be released, and this is exciting. I've got it'll be like the first 2 years I've got down. I really experimented the first year. I feel like I'm getting it more locked in now this year, and I'm feeling pretty solid about it. Now it's just, what does the future look like? What does the future of Speak Plainly look like? And that's an exciting new venture. If you have any suggestions, let me know. Shoot me an email at speakplainlypodcast@gmail.com. That would be great. I'd love to hear from you and hear what you have to say. Now, on to today's podcast. One more thing. I lied. Instead of on to today's podcast, maybe I should really start introducing myself better. I feel like that's something that should happen. So I'm going to start doing that on this episode. You've already heard my intro. Welcome. This is the Speak Plainly podcast, where we speak plainly about things that matter. I'm the host. I am Owl Medicine, but I am also a best-selling author of the title Emotions Are Logical. I have written and am about to release Rethinking Broken, and I am the host of this podcast. I founded decolonizehealthcare.com, which is an online educational platform where people can learn about health and medicine from perspectives other than Western medicine. And that's me. I'm a veteran. I was homeless for years. I now live in the beautiful Pacific Northwest, and I still do lots of traveling. I'm currently van lifing it. Now that I'm no longer writing a book, I moved back out of my apartment and into my van because rent is expensive, and I like freedom. So, there's a long, weird, I know I'm totally changing the way that I do this, but that's kind of the point. But there's a long, weird introduction for myself. Now that we're like 7 minutes into this, let's get into what today's podcast is actually all about. Now, I don't have the name for it yet picked out because there's just too many pretty good names. Nothing is perfect yet. But they all center around this theme. I've thought of Orchestral You. That's a good one. The multiplicative you. The multiples of me. That might be one I do. Multiples of me. Because what I'm trying to talk about is a weird phenomenon that I've noticed. And I've noticed it a lot in my friends and my coaching practice, especially. And I think it's really important to all of us. It fits in with the things that we normally talk about and the things in my book. But basically what I'm talking about is, no matter what you call it, whether it's multiple you or orchestral you or multiples of me, what I'm talking about is how there are many, many versions of us living inside of us. Now, in today's world, we talk about tomorrow me and past me or sober me or drunk me or whatever. And we just use it as a trapping in language, but it actually is more than that. It does affect us on a big level because there is something very real happening behind the scenes, and that language just kind of gives light to it. But what's happening, from what I can tell, is each of us are an orchestra. Each of us are comprised of so many things. We're so many things to so many people. This is the principle of intersectionalism. I am white, but I am also mixed race, as being part Native and Welsh and Scottish and French and Spanish. I'm multiple different kinds of all of those things, and those are all just the intersectionalism of my race. Then you get into, I'm from the Midwest, but I'm also a liberal, but I'm also queer, I'm also 6 foot tall. I'm also brown haired. All of these things describe me, right? Each one of these things is a small facet of who I am. And when we talk about future me or past me or bad bitch me or whatever, it brings light to this really powerful, very subtle reality. And that subtle reality is the fact that there are always multiple narratives like living inside of us at once. There are always multiple stories happening simultaneously. And what matters is the story that we tell, right? The story that we write. I'm all about writing new narratives and finding compassionate narratives for ourselves and making our world and our lives a better place through narrative. And today, we're going to explore how many narratives there really are in us and how they work together or not to either make a beautiful symphony or a cacophony. One or the other, or something in between, right? And usually it's both. It's part of it is cacophonous and part of it is symphonious, if that's a word. I hope it is. I'm going to leave it in because I'm going to Google it after this, and I hope symphonious is a word. If it's not, it should be for symphony-like. So what I'm really talking about from a good place to start might be the concept that I created for my book, Strengthnesses. And I talk about them in a previous podcast titled Strengthnesses. And go back and listen to that podcast if you want to break down the whole thing, but you don't have to. This is real simple. Basically, anything that you survive that's traumatic enough, that's stressful enough, it becomes traumatic, especially if you survive that kind of traumatic thing or chronic stress thing over and over and over and over again, you develop parts of yourself that become a little overdeveloped. They become too big for their britches, and they kind of sabotage us in some ways and also make us feel like total badasses in others. That's the concept of a strengthness, is it's a strength and a weakness in one. It is an attribute of our personality that has become so strong-headed that it, in some circumstances, is a superpower, and in other circumstances is a total weakness. It's our kryptonite. And each one of those, like I said, is a facet of ourselves. And each facet or strengthness, if it gets big enough, has its own narrative, right? And that narrative in a strengthness, which is the most dramatic version of these facets, that narrative is singular and it is loud. But when you get a little further away from those strengthnesses, there becomes a little bit more room for other voices in this. And what I mean by this is, like, you know this feeling of when you're dysregulated, when you're upset, all you can think about is this one thing. There's a problem and all you want to do is solve it. Whether that's an actual problem that you're trying to solve or you're feeling some type of way and then that feeling is now the problem that you were trying to solve. All you can focus on is solving either the problem itself or the feeling, which has become the problem itself. And these facets, as they grow, that narrative becomes stronger and stronger because there is one narrative that we wound up believing and repeating over and over and over again because that is the way that we got ourselves through a certain type of situation. If your mother was a bit of a perfectionist and no matter what you did, nothing was ever good enough, then one of your strengthnesses is doing everything perfectly. Now, it's also a weakness because you can't do anything perfectly and it totally screws you over. But the narrative that you leave that with is if I do everything right or everything well, then I won't be criticized. And that's as close as we can get to love sometimes. Or maybe we just don't want to be criticized and it don't go that deep. But that's the narrative. The narrative is if I do well, if I perform well, I will be liked, I will be loved, I will not be criticized, I will belong. And that's great, but that's the narrative that you came up with to survive a nitpicking mother. And that's not that useful when you are, say, in a war zone or providing refugee care like the context isn't right. So that narrative for that context is, okay, well, when things get rough, if I do everything perfectly, then that'll be fine. That'll get me through it, which is great. That'll get you through it. And you probably really like the parts of you that help you to get things done like really well. I know that I do. I like those perfectionist parts when I can keep them in check. And that's the point, is keeping them in check, because that's one narrative. That is one, in the orchestral you part, that is one instrument. It's a tuba or it's a trumpet. And who you are, who I am, is more than just a trumpet. We are a symphony. There are multiples of us. There are multiples of these things living inside of us, multiple facets of who we are, and each of those facets has a narrative. And the thing about these facets is the context determines the person that I can be for any situations. But if those pieces don't feel as though they're under control, then they control me. And that's what I mean by the context determines the person that I can be. If I'm not in control of these aspects of me, or if I lose perspective and I'm okay with only following the narrative of one of the facets of who I am, then I'll just keep going down that one facet so long as the context is appropriate for that facet. And then as soon as the context changes and I need to be a different person, then I will be a different person and I will choose the same habits that that person has, right? So, for example, this is probably getting kind of mucky. So, for an example, I've got a coaching client who is totally awesome, and she was actually the first person that I noticed how profound this was, because she has an answer for everything. She always has an answer for everything, and the answer is always correct, but there is zero connection from one answer to the other. We realized there's at least 7 or 8 narratives that are fully alive and well inside her at any given moment in time. And she always has the right answer for stuff. So how is she still struggling to do what she needs to do and always winding up in the exact same situation that she was in when she knows the answer and she knows how to deal with it? And when the time comes, she does typically deal with it in the way it needs to be dealt with, right? And so how does this not work out? Well, the problem is, inside her, we have, I just wrote down a few things here of, the badass boss bitch. We have queen of sales. We have the ghetto fabulous. We have a hella Asian mom. And we also have the hella black mom that's inside her. We also have the creative and the liberal, which are kind of the same person. But we also have a pragmatist, and there's an idealist. And this is true for all of us. There is a practical side to who you are. There's a practical side to who I am. There's an idealistic and a creative side to each of us. There's a side that we show at work. There's a side that we show to our friends and a side that we show to our family. And each of these have different narratives. And the reason that this became so obvious when talking to her was because we were in a coaching session and I watched the answers. I would ask a question and I would see these answers. They would be perfectly fine answers. Any answer that you give in a coaching session is totally fine. It's just helping a person explore their own stuff. And what I realized is that every time she'd give an answer, it would dramatically contradict what she just said 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes earlier. Total opposite. And the reason is because I would ask a question that would be answered by a different facet. These answers were, the answers didn't come from the whole gem of a person. If we're talking about the facets of a gem, or it didn't come from the whole orchestra. I would ask a question and boom, the trumpet would answer. I'd ask another question and boom, the trombone would answer, and then the strings would answer, and then the drums would answer. And never once did the conductor answer. And that's the problem. That's the problem with it, with all of us. We all struggle with this. It just became obvious with this friend and was like, oh, this is a really good thing to talk about because I've actually seen this with multiple people and I see it constantly, but I've actually purposefully, specifically helped two coaching clients out with this exact kind of problem. My one friend with the 8 different narratives, we sat down and we talked about that and was like, wow. She was like, you're right. I didn't see that I was doing this. I didn't see that there are so many different narratives living inside of me. And all I do is I pick the one that has the best answer with the least resistance. And there's no integration of those parts. And that's where the problem is the lack of integration of these parts. We are not the symphony. If you want to think of you as a person, the closest you might be able to get other than the sound itself is probably the nearest thing to you. And if it's not the sound itself, it would certainly be the conductor. Because that's, to me, I talk about the wise self, right? We have our emotional self and our rational self, and then the two of those combined, when we look at and validate what our emotional side wants and what our rational side wants, that's when we're using our wise mind, which is a term from CBT. And our wise mind is essentially the conductor, right? But instead of just being this emotional side and the logic side, and we're trying to combine those two sides, what I'm talking about now is having a princess cut diamond and then trying to make decisions according to what's best for the diamond as a whole instead of just a single facet. Because looking at the emotional and the logical side is basically, if you want to use that same analogy, that's a diamond with 2 facets, which is kind of just a plane, right? That's it would literally be a line. It would be a 2-dimensional little plane, because you have one side and then you have the other, emotional and logical, and that's it. So in the book, actually, that I'm super happy that I have a copy of right now. It's in my hand. I'm holding it. I'm looking at it. It makes me happy. I do tell a story with another friend of mine. Her name is Sandy in the book. And we did a guided meditation because Sandy was stepping out to try to do some entrepreneurial stuff and was like, all right, how do I do all of this? And as we talked, we came to recognize that there were 2 different narratives living inside of Sandy. And those 2 different narratives were essentially the boss and the employee. And it turned out that just because of the past and the jobs that Sandy had had, the boss thought all the employee was lazy, and the lazy employee thought the boss was incompetent. And that creates an issue when you are both the boss and the employee. And so what we did in the guided meditation to help integrate these parts, because that's the thing. I don't want to just talk about the problem. I want to talk about a way to bring a solution about, is we had both of these narratives, both of these facets. We gave them names and personas, and we sat them in a room. We had the badass boss, and then we had the little employee. And the employee was like, I'm not important. I don't feel special. I'm not gonna, nobody is ever gonna treat me well, because they'd never been in a job or in a position where an employee had been treated very well, and was really just always kind of being a little bit of a brat to the boss. And the boss was not having it and being kind of rude to the employee. And what does this actually equate to? In her head, it was, I'm a terrible boss and a terrible employee, but we couldn't get to that place yet. We had to work through the fact that it was just these narratives inside her head of her talking to herself, her complaining to herself that she is a bad boss and complaining to herself that she is a bad employee. But until we personified this, we depersonalized it by actually personifying it, then it became super obvious. I had to look at the like the body positioning. Okay, well, look at the body positioning of the employee versus the boss. How is the boss sitting? How is the employee sitting? How would you like the boss to be sitting? How would you like the employee to be sitting? How would you like their relationship to be? And as we visualized these things, and she talked about these things and gave specific examples, it changed everything. And she was able to pursue exactly what she wanted to pursue in her entrepreneurial way with a totally renewed sense of vigor and integration. She didn't have to worry about that stuff anymore because she realized that she was both the boss and the employee. And if she wanted to change some boss stuff, she could do that, and vice versa for the employee stuff. She could change that if she wanted. It's all up to her. But we have to realize that these narratives are living inside us all the time, and they're playing themselves out. And it's context that determines how we respond to things. This is the process of neuroception we've talked about, which is a concept brought forward by polyvagal theory. Basically, everything that our nervous system detects in the entire world that isn't consciously detected is detected through neuroception. And neuroception is trained via conditioning. And that conditioning is largely context-based. It is event and context-based, right? So when a person, like a family member, shows up, suddenly that makes our context much more similar to when we were a child, especially if it's a parent or a sibling. That puts us in a much more childlike mindset, in a much more childlike state, not consciously, but subconsciously, because it picks things up through neuroception. And it's picking it up, oh, hey, look, you're around these people. Last time you were around these people, you acted this way, which is why every time I go back and like hang out with fam, somehow things always get weird and old. And it's like, you think something's never changed, except they did. At least you thought, but now it seems like maybe they didn't at all. I don't know. Things get weird when we visit family, and this is the reason to me. Okay, so now we've talked about my friend with the 8 different narratives, and we've talked about my friend with just the 2 basic narratives, and there's every layer in between. And I'm sure that with my friend with a bunch of narratives, we could break it down to just 2 and look at emotional and logical, and we could break down my friend Sandy's and look at much more than just those 2. But you get the point. For myself, I recently lived through this because with the podcast and writing this book, and then the episode where I did going toe to toe with my narcissistic father, what I realized is that I said it then, all of the parts of me that have ever existed, I needed. In order to become who I am now and who I am today, I had to call in all of those parts of me. The problem is that each of those parts of me were very, very strong. The empathy in me is very, very strong. The give no fucks asshole in me is very, very strong. The adventurous, I gotta be out and find something novel and explore the world is very strong. And the, yeah, but I'm tired and I've never had a home and I just really want to be accepted and feel safe is also very, very strong in me. Each of these narratives are so strong individually and independently that when I get into that state, the empathetic state or the totally independent state, those narratives were so strong that you couldn't fit in a word edgewise. And I mean that in the way of each facet has a narrative, and none of the other facets of me, when I was in one of those spaces in my empathetic place, the rational, logical, independent me didn't exist. And vice versa. When I was in that rational, logical part of me, that empathetic part didn't exist. And the problem with that is you wind up focused entirely on the narrative that piece is laying out for us. And like I said, all of this is happening through neuroception, so it's all very much a subconscious process. And with how strong the independent part of me was, and then through acupuncture school and everything, I opened up and I learned how to be empathetic, and I learned how to be an empathetic witness and an empathetic presence and to feel for other people. Because I think I was born with it, and then I lost that through childhood because it didn't serve me. And everything in biology is use it or lose it. So over the course of time with this podcast and this book, I've been forced to learn to integrate all the different parts of me. I've had to call in all of the parts, everything from who I was when I was a small child through Staff Sergeant Phelan in the military. I had to bring his ass out. And he was the one that I was so proud of having shut down, because that guy was a douche. That guy was a dick. He was an asshole. He was funny. He was smart. He was damn good at his job, and nobody could fuck with him. But he was also all these other things, and a very, very strong personality. And so when he popped up at first, it was just, oh, well, now I'm Staff Sergeant Phelan again. And that's not a great guy to be around. But if I remember to try to be the maestro, then I can point at Sergeant Phelan and I can be like, you. And he pops up and he plays his little part on his horn. And then I can point at brand new gentle owl fresh out of acupuncture school. And I can get his 2 cents. And that makes things much, much better, because basically all we're trying to do is reparent ourselves in a way. And this keeps like integrating these parts in the way that I'm talking about and bringing them together, and whether that's through a guided meditation like I did with Sandy, or whether it's through a task focused thing, which we're going to get into in a second. The integration is key. Both you can be anything and you need to be practical. Because back to my friend who is both who's a mom and an idealist and a pragmatist, that the idealist can tell her child, you can be anything that you want in the world. And that is true. But the pragmatist says, yeah, except you're black and you're kind of Chinese looking too. And that's going to be something that you have to deal with. You're going to have to deal with racism. You're going to have to deal with other shit. There are very real world limitations placed on you that have nothing to do with you or your qualifications, but you will have to deal with them. And the thing is, if we only get those pieces separately, as children or as we are reparenting ourselves, we forget that they exist simultaneously. They only exist when we are in the narrative of the empathetic person. That's the only time that you can be anything and you're the idealist and you have that sort of uplifting narrative to your life. And then when things are hard, you got to be practical. And again, it locks us into one or the other. And we're not integrating these pieces. And that's what causes problems, because without integrating these pieces, we are constantly being thrown around by life. Whatever happens, whatever situation comes up, well, there's a part of me that knows how to deal with that. Yeah, there's a part of you that is conditioned to deal with that in a certain way, and you are 99% of the time going to act out of that conditioning, of that facet of who you are. Maybe it'll work, maybe it doesn't. But if you focus on the maestro, you focus on being the conductor of these facets of you, the conductor of the orchestral you that is this beautiful symphony of all of these things, all of these experiences that you've had and how they have changed you and formed you. That's how we find our way out. Because if you keep feeling like you're doing the things that you need to do and life keeps happening and you're handling it the best you can, but you totally just feel stuck, I can almost guarantee that this is a big part of that. Because you are handling things to the best of your ability, and the best of your ability that exists right now is whatever way you have been conditioned to deal with that type of situation. It is not until you learn to have two narratives, at least, happening simultaneously that you begin to gain control over your life. Because that is when you can say, yes, I can be anything, but I also need to be practical. Instead of, I can be anything. And then you run with that. And then you run into a wall and you realize that there are practical considerations. And then you go, oh, well, I need to be practical. And you give up. It's that simple. It's a very complicated way to get to something very, very simple. But that's what I see. When these narratives do not live together, they provide us impetus. We can have the excitement to go and get something done. I can be anything. And then when the challenges come, we change narratives. Whereas if we believe that all of these narratives are living simultaneously, then you reach this level that what I call, for me, I've been calling myself recently a dialectic intersectionalist. That's my favorite now. I call myself a dialectic intersectionalist because intersectionalism is just that every single thing on the world is all interconnected, and it is all intersecting at the same time. That's what I meant when I'm like, I'm white and I'm male and I'm queer and I'm 6 foot tall and I live in the Pacific Northwest and like all these things. These are all intersectionalist arguments. That's like these things all exist simultaneously. I am both oppressed as a queer person and I am privileged as a white male. Those two things do not belong together. They do not exist together. How can I be both oppressed and be privileged? But it's true. I am both. Right? That is intersectionalism. Dialectic is this concept of taking two things that are seemingly opposed and finding a way, for me specifically, finding a narrative that proves that they are not actually mutually exclusive. So for me, dialectic intersectionalism is how I've been identifying myself just as a fun thing recently. And it's cool because it actually lines up perfectly with the orchestral you. So thank you for joining me for this podcast. I hope that you enjoyed it. I'm excited to be back in the swing of things and doing these back. I'm hoping to be doing it again every week or every 2 weeks. I'm really looking forward to it. The next one will be all about the release of my book, Rethinking Broken. I'm super excited about that. If you haven't, go over to rethinkingbroken.com and sign up for my newsletter, and you will get a free newsletter that gives you all of the information about Rethinking Broken. I very rarely make them because it's work, so you're not going to get blasted. I only release a newsletter when there is actually something to be announced, because I do all this stuff myself. So I'm not going to blast your email or anything. Go sign up, and you will get a free copy of my Amazon best-selling title, Emotions Are Logical, Even the Stupid Ones. Thank you again for listening. I'm super glad that you're hanging out. Super glad that you stuck around and you're listening to this. If you like this podcast, consider doing the Buy Me a Coffee thing or join our Patreon. And if you would, leave a review. Thank you very much for your time. And remember, stay curious and stay uncomfortable.